Once Rome and the SA are tamed, Rome eliminated, we can say that Hitler and the Nazi Party and his faction of the Nazi Party now have complete and total control. Hitler will never really settle in Berlin. He doesn't particularly like Berlin, and so essentially, as Fuhrer, he settles in this chalet in the south of Germany near the Austrian border. That's his home there. It's known as the Berghof or the Mountain House. Sometimes it's described as Berchtesgaden. That's a town that is near its vicinity, or Obersalzburg. That's the name of the region, but it is in the south of Germany. There was a small cottage there that apparently Dietrich Ehrhardt introduced Hitler to way back in the early 1920s. Hitler took a liking to that region, and over the years began, as he became wealthy, buying up property, and then when he became powerful, began just expropriating property. Eventually, all his minions will build their homes around Hitler's Berghof. You can see up that slope behind the house all these little chalets and houses. Hitler really loathed Berlin. He was as an Austrian, he kind of had a more sense of kinship with Southern Catholic Germans. The Nazi Party again was founded in Munich, rose in Munich. The party headquarters was in Munich. So Berlin was a place where Hitler would go for formal occasions when he had to kind of make appearances as the head of state, but essentially as Fuhrer, he just stayed away and worked and lived in the Berghof until the war begins. After the war, he will start spending less and less time there, setting up in bunkers. Is that a question I heard? No. So this is kind of what it looks like on the ground level. There, Hitler settles with his mistress, Eva Braun, and his German Shepherd dog, Blondie. No one knows that he has a mistress. Hitler kind of preferred to give this image that he's just a poor, monk-like guy who doesn't have time for women or wealth or luxury or anything. Not quite true, but that's the image that he had projected. Here, if you're kind of a pro-Nazi head of state or a politician, you'll be invited to visit Hitler at the Berghof. Here you can see the future fascist leader of fascist premier of France, Pierre Laval, on a visit to the Berghof. If you're not friendly with Hitler and Nazi Germany, you're kind of a little bit more hostile, then you'll be invited to Berlin. To the Chancellery, and we'll look at the Chancellery as much more intimidating. Essentially, all of Hitler's minions, as I say, spend their time there. It's Hitler, of course, likes, like an artist, likes to sleep in late, stay up late, and so these poor guys who work for Hitler, they have a ministry to run. Often they have to be at their desk or on the phone by 8 in the morning, but while Hitler gets up at 11 at noon. They have to put in like a double day. And then in the evening, there are all these kind of soirees and dinner parties. And then Hitler will speak for hours on end as everybody pretends to be completely focused on what he's saying. Communal meals are common. Hitler himself is a vegetarian, non-smoker, non-drinker, but he's not kind of a strident vegetarian. He doesn't mind if people around him eat meat or drink as long as they don't smoke. So he's not like a missionary vegetarian. But they do have these communal meals together, and essentially a lot of the decision-making process and
You can take my peanut butter away.
a lot of the decision-making processes and ruling take place through these informal meetings at his chalet. It's quite larger from the inside when you look at it, quite luxurious as well. You might have heard the terms the eagle's nest. It's near this location, Berchtesgaden. It's a tea house that's built for him as a birthday present. Hitler very rarely uses it. He occasionally takes visitors there, but Berchtesgaden is not exactly the eagle's nest. You'll hear that term. So it has these spectacular views. Eventually, it will be blown up by the United States Army. It will be captured in ruins at the end of the war. And then so it doesn't become a place of pilgrimage. It'll be leveled. But here, often informally, Hitler's minions meet, and essentially, as I say, Hitler governs from this location, and once the war begins, he's going to be in a series of bunkers that will be set up near the front line of where the German army might be taking the initiative. The last of his bunkers are going to be in East Prussia, where the attempt on his life will take place in July of 1944. Hitler is now using the term Fuhrer and Reichschancellor. And Fuhrer, it kind of is more than just simply meaning new president. It has a more complex meaning. It's based on something more than the authority confirmed upon Hitler by his government office, which of course has certain constitutional obligations. Remember, the Nazis will never scrap the Weimar Constitution. They'll just suspend most of its provisions, but essentially the Nazi government is still resting on top of the Weimar Constitution as it's in this Emergency Enabling Act decree, and they'll just now keep renewing the Enabling Act. The title Fuhrer kind of lays claim to an authority that overrides and transcends the state and the Constitution on the basis of historical destiny or historical mission, the will of Hitler as a revelation of the German people's will and destiny, the will kind of an oath-bound folk formed by the National Socialist movement. And Hitler essentially sees himself as a reincarnation of the people's will. And so he has all sorts of pretensions to authority beyond kind of the traditional state governmental authority. I'll read for you how Ernst Rudolf Huber, a Nazi constitutional theorist and lawyer, he'll write a textbook, Constitutional Law of the Greater German Reich, the Großdeutschland. That's The term Greater German Reich or Große Deutschland refers to Germany and Austria after they annexed Austria in the Anschluss in 1938. It includes as well parts of Czechoslovakia and several parts of Poland, meaning kind of a Germany that is beyond the traditional borders as established by the Weimar, as established by the Versailles Treaty. So the Greater German Reich is a term for kind of the heart of what is going to be new Germany under Hitler territorially. So what does Huber say? Huber writes, he says, quote, the office of Fuhrer emanates from the National Socialist movement. In origin, it is not a governmental office. This fact must never be overlooked if the present political and legal position of the Fuhrer is to be understood. Originating from the movement, the office of Fuhrer has grown its way into the Reich as the Fuhrer has taken over in turn, first the powers of the Reichschancellor and then the position of head of state. He remains, however, primarily the Fuhrer of the movement. As such, he has drawn into himself the Reich's two most exalted political leadership functions, thus creating a new office, Fuhrer of the German people and German Reich. The Fuhrer combines in his own person the entire supreme authority of the Reich, all public authority, both in the state and in the movement, stems from that of the Fuhrer. The correct term for political authority in the People's Reich is therefore not, quote, the authority of the state, end of quote, but, quote, the authority of the Fuhrer, end of quote. This is so because political authority is wielded not by an impersonal entity, the state, but by the Fuhrer as executor of the united will of the people. The authority of the Fuhrer is total and all-embracing. Within it, all resources available to the body politic merge. It covers every facet of the life of the people. It embraces all members of the German community, pledged to loyalty and obedience to the Fuhrer. The Fuhrer's authority is subject to no checks or controls. It is circumscribed by no private preserves or jealously guarded individual rights. It is free and independent, overriding and unfettered. End of quote. So that's essentially how the Nazi constitutional theorists are going to look at it. The question now, of course, is how does the Nazi Party fit into all this? Who takes precedence, the party or the Fuhrer, the state or the party? And you know, the party's function essentially was to bring Hitler to power. But now that he is the all-powerful Fuhrer, what is left for the party to do? And of course, that was essentially the issue for this conflict that Hitler had with the more radical revolutionary members of his party. Now that Hitler kind of put the revolutionaries to death, essentially, that question is up in the air. Historian Hans Fischer, he writes that the history of the Nazi Party was no history at all, but a series of dead ends and arrested developments. So while the Nazi Party essentially is infiltrating the corridors of power, as you have that act, remember, passed in December, unity of party and state. At the same time, Germany's perhaps non-Nazi members are also infiltrating the Nazi Party, the elites. They're either joining the party or they're becoming like Schacht. I think he's an excellent example. These kind of willing devil's disciples, willing collaborators. The Nazi Party grows dramatically in the first 3 months after the appointment of Hitler as chancellor. And so in those 3 months following January 30th, 1.6 million Germans joined the Nazi Party. 65% of its membership. They all rush in now. In those 3 months immediately after Hitler becomes chancellor. Now everybody's a Nazi. All right, they all want to be in it, and so many people are rushing in, joining the Nazi Party that the old fighters, the old pre-January 30th Nazis are beginning to resent all these new joiners. And so very quickly, you're going to see the emergence of this kind of two classes in the Nazi Party. The old fighters, and the old fighters, they will wear this chevron on their sleeve of their uniform on the right side, indicating that they had joined the party prior to January 30th. As well, we'll see that starting in May 1933, Hitler closes the membership books of the party. You can't join anymore. And they won't reopen until 1937. The only exception will be to kind of honorary membership to elites. They will reopen party membership briefly when the party begins to run out of money. And if you pay this exorbitant amount, you can join the party. But otherwise, party membership remains closed essentially up until 1939. Essentially, after 37, he'll open it. For some, but not for all. But in 1939, the party member books are reopened again. At this point, the party membership is 2.5 million in 1939. Hitler's objective is to enroll 10% of the German population into the Nazi Party, which he will actually do, roughly 10%. By 1945, 8.5 million Germans will become Nazi Party members. It, of course, becomes essential for your professional career to be a member of the Nazi Party, whether you're a believer or not. But we can see that, as I say, approximately 10% of the German population became card-carrying, dues-paying Nazis. And of course, after the war, the Allies will have this kind of legal process, denazification courts, where anybody who was a member of the Nazi Party has to go before this court and kind of prove to the court that they had committed a minimum of offenses, that they perhaps joined the Nazi Party because they professionally had to, and so the denazification courts will go through that process where they'll denazify um, former members of the Nazi Party. They'll either be fined or their civil rights will be suspended for a year or 2 years. Issues like whether they can run for public office, whether they can vote, all these things are part of the denazification process. So again, 8.5 million in 1945. If you ever want to know, how many Nazis were there in Nazi Germany? Well, the number is 8.5 million out of a population of I've seen different numbers out of a population of 65 to 85 million. It's hard to adjudicate the German population because of the way Hitler later moved the borders and so forth, and people were moving back and forth across the border. So by 1945, approximately 85 million individuals could have called themselves German citizens in the Greater German Reich. Excuse me. So the Nazi Party, it remains functioning in essentially three ways. You have the chain of command and the territorial cadres. The chain of command, as I described, the Gauleiters, and then the Ortsgruppenleiters and the Zellleiters and so forth. I described those territorial cadres. You then have the party divisions like the SS, the SA, the Hitler Youth, and so forth. These are paramilitary like divisions of the party. And then three, the affiliated organizations. Again, I described them to you. The League of German Lawyers, the League of German Teachers, and so forth. That's essentially the structure. The question, of course, is who takes precedence, the government or the party? And what we see emerging essentially is this kind of dual state where you have a party that's very powerful and a ruling party, and then you have the traditional state mechanisms that are still existing under the old Weimar Constitution that Hitler never essentially takes apart. So if we look at the chain of command, it essentially begins in the Fuhrer chancellery, and chancellery essentially means office. Right? The head of the Fuhrer chancellery, the Kanzlei der Führers, or the KDF, as it's known, is Philip Bohler. Philip Bohler is this kind of intellectual, very highly educated. His job as the head of the Fuhrer chancellery is to negotiate relationships essentially within the party. It sounds like a nice job, simple job. One of the other jobs he also has is also to liaison with the public and the Fuhrer. He's kind of a buffer between the Fuhrer and the public. He deals with personal petitions being sent to Hitler, asking Hitler to use his Fuhrer power. Hitler gets about 2,000 petitions a day, people asking the Fuhrer for anything, for like a job, a position to, can you cancel my parking tickets? My neighbor is making too much noise, shit like that. Um, he's got a huge staff of people who review these petitions and respond to them. So, as I say, it seems like a harmless job until in 39, Bowler gets a petition from the parents of a handicapped child asking the Fuhrer to give their physician permission to euthanize their child. And it's Bowler's job to handle this petition, which he now takes to the Fuhrer. And the Fuhrer and Dr. Brandt, who's kind of like the Surgeon General of Nazi Germany. He's also Hitler's personal physician in the 30s before Dr. Morell takes over that position. They look at this petition, and Hitler decides he will grant the family their petition, but at the same time, he now tells Bowler, take care of all the other handicapped kids as well. Kill them all. And so Bowler now, coming from this harmless job, suddenly in 39, finds himself in charge of what becomes known as Operation T4, which we'll look in detail a few lectures down. But Bowler now finds himself in charge of killing all these disabled children and eventually disabled adults in what becomes, as I say, this program of medical murder. And we'll look at that in detail. So that's essentially Bowler's function, and it will be right up until the end of the Third Reich. He'll be either commit suicide or is executed in 1949. Rudolf Hess is the deputy Fuhrer. He's been described as the party conscience. His duty is to liaison with government ministries, explain to them what party policy is and how, the post office or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Agriculture needs to interpret Nazi party ideology in their legislation, in their regulations, and in the conduct of the ministries. He also acts as a kind of arbitrator in party disputes, as well as disputes between the party and government offices. It's a lot of kind of typically as you see in the United States currently, there were a lot of bureaucrats who were appointed 20, 30 years ago who are in deep opposition to what the president is doing. And so Hitler also finds himself with a lot of opposition from bureaucrats, and it's not kind of ideological opposition. It's the kind that will get you arrested. It's kind of what we'll describe as selective opposition, where ministers are saying, well, we're behind you, but this is not the best way of doing something. And so it's Hess's job to essentially negotiate these kinds of conflicts. Nominally, the deputy Fuhrer is also in charge of the Gauleiters. Now, Hess, of course, flies off to England. So you imagine how important it is for a deputy Fuhrer to suddenly wind up trying to negotiate a peace with the British, and what kind of shock it is to the Nazis. And as I say, the British end of the reception that Hess got in Britain when he flew there in the spring of 1941 is still classified. It's not scheduled to be fully declassified until 2040 or 2041. So we got another 21 years to wait, 2 decades to wait before we can really get a sense of what exactly transpired on that flight once Hess arrived there in England. Once Hess does this, the position of deputy Fuhrer is kind of abolished, and Martin Bormann will now fill in that function. And Martin Bormann is another key minion. Some argue actually that Martin Bormann was absolutely the most powerful man in the Third Reich, and there is good evidence for that.
I tried to tag you on something in Facebook, but didn't know how to tag you, so she just wrote your name.
Sorry, say again, Samantha?
Yeah. I'll tell her. Are you in class now? Yeah. Can they see me? No.
Martin Bormann, you can see almost no decorations. He does wear the order, the blood order. You can see that in a gold party badge, but other than that, he's kind of very plain. He becomes known as the Brown Eminence, partly again for kind of the brown color of his uniform, partly brown, kind of a dull color. He doesn't make public speeches. He's often not identified in propaganda. He's kind of an invisible man. A lot of Germans don't even know that Martin Bormann exists, Germans outside of the Nazi party. He nominally, his title, he is now the head of the party chancellery. That's how that office of deputy Fuhrer is now redefined. The Parteikanzlei. Whenever you see Hitler with prominent Nazis or diplomats or a major important meeting, Bormann is almost always there lurking in the shadows. This is a photo of Hitler about an hour after the failed attempt to blow him up, July 20th, 1944. Bormann is there with him. Bormann essentially dogs Hitler wherever he goes. Hitler on the phone, Bormann is there leaning into the conversation. Bormann's position is going to grow over the war. First of all, he's a minister without portfolio in the government itself. As of January 1942, Bormann will be given full participation in the preparation of all government laws and regulations, including those of the Council of the Ministers for the Reich Defense. So essentially, Bormann, as Hitler now begins to focus, as of 1939, essentially, Hitler begins to focus on just mismanaging the war. And so as Hitler begins full-time just being in command of combat and the war strategy, Bormann gradually takes over for Hitler in terms of domestic policy and domestic rule. He is the Fuhrer. He supervises all government policy at home, and including defense at home as well. Bormann has the power to reverse all court decisions. So he's kind of like the supreme justice over the Nazi Supreme Court. Bormann, in April of 1943, is appointed secretary to the Fuhrer. His authority will now include managing all of Hitler's personal affairs, including his financial affairs. Hitler's worth at the end of the war is estimated at an extraordinary 1.3 billion Reichsmarks. So if you want that in US dollars at that time, one Reichsmark was roughly equal to 25 cents US. So 1.3 billion divided by 4 give you the $1 million, right? So we're talking about what, around a little bit over $300 million that Hitler has sort of squirreled away around the world, and to this day, nobody knows under what name, under what accounts. As I say, he owned property in Colorado, he had bank accounts in Switzerland, in England, and where that money went, the Bavarian government, of course, which after the war seized Hitler's property, since he was a resident of Bavaria, technically speaking, has never been able to successfully find any of those accounts. So all sorts of conspiratorial theories circle around that money and around Martin Bormann. So Martin Bormann as well participates in all the meetings. Martin Bormann summarizes all telegrams, letters, memorandums relating to military, political, social, and economic affairs that are sent to Hitler. They land on Bormann's desk, and then Bormann will summarize what he feels needs to be summarized for Hitler, and he'll give Hitler that version. There's no communicating directly with Hitler. Bormann's job as well is to communicate Hitler's decisions and opinions to the party leaders, to the ministers and other high-ranking civil and party officials. So by this point, the only people who are getting verbal orders or direct orders from Hitler are essentially the generals and the members of the SS. Everybody else, they get their orders through Bormann. And often, of course, what Hitler does is essentially just tells Bormann, you go ahead and decide what's right. So in terms of internal issues in Germany, Bormann schedules all of Hitler's appointments. You don't get in to see Hitler until Bormann writes you into the appointment book and decides you're worthy of meeting with Hitler, or it's urgent enough. Bormann handles Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun, and Eva Braun hates Bormann because he's kind of very stingy with Hitler's millions. So every time, Eva wants to buy a new dress, she's got to fight with Bormann for the budget. Bormann manages the functions of the Fuhrer headquarters. For example, which secretaries get hired, personal staff, the butlers, the bodyguards, and so forth are all chosen by Martin Bormann. Berchtesgaden, whether you get to build a chalet next to Hitler's chalet, depends on whether Martin Bormann gives you the go-ahead. And so most top Nazis hate Bormann. Himmler, Goebbels, Goering, they all kind of conspire to try to get around Bormann, and they just don't manage. Bormann remains there right to the end. Bormann also maintains Hitler's legacy. Those long tirades that he goes on in the evenings. Bormann has a staff of stenographers that write down everything that Hitler says over dinner. And then Bormann edits Hitler's talks, and we have those. Those have survived. They're published under a number of titles, from Hitler's table talk to Hitler's conversations to Hitler's secret conversations. They're all in public domain, essentially, so you'll see them under different titles. But those stenographic notes of what Hitler said at these dinner tables, as edited by Bormann, have survived. And at the end of the war, Bormann remains with Hitler in the bunker, essentially. When Hitler marries Eva Braun shortly before committing suicide, and I mean shortly, like hours before they both commit suicide, Bormann is kind of the best man. He's the witness at the wedding. He supervises on April 30th, 1945, the failed burning of Hitler's body. So Bormann is there right to the end, and so once he finishes his attempt to cremate Hitler's body, Bormann now takes this briefcase with all of Hitler's bank accounts, his records, his last will and testament, and then Bormann makes a run for it, attempting to escape Berlin, which is surrounded by Soviet troops at this point. The story now gets a little bit cloudy. Witnesses state that Bormann and his escort are near a train station. They're crossing the tracks, attempting to escape, and a Russian tank kind of comes around the corner, sees this group of people running, and they probably didn't know this was Martin Bormann. They wheel their gun towards the group and fire a shot into the group, and there's this explosion. When the smoke clears, witnesses say that in the crater they see Bormann's body all blown to pieces, and just tatters of whatever the briefcase he was carrying. If they saw it, it was just like nothing but like ashes and tatters. Nobody can confirm this. And there are all these sightings of Bormann that will continue, and to the point that this report of his death is so unreliable that the International Military Tribunal indicts Bormann on the assumption that he's still living. And of course, Bormann becomes one of the defendants at Nuremberg, but he's tried in absentia. When I'm growing up, I remember reading numerous interviews done with Bormann in exile. Bormann is described as heading the Fourth Reich. Bormann is described as using all of that Hitler's money to set up neo-Nazi groups, that Bormann runs a slush fund for escaping Nazi war criminals in South America, that Bormann lives somewhere in Paraguay, all these different theories, including the theory that Bormann was actually always from the beginning a spy for the Russians, and that the Russians essentially exfiltrated him at the end of the war and kept him hidden or murdered him, so nobody knows that Bormann was actually working for Russian intelligence. And there's going to be a similar accusation about Heinrich Himmler, the head of the Gestapo, as well. None of these allegations have been proven. Nonetheless, December 1972, at the railway station where Bormann was last seen, they decide they're going to convert this abandoned railway station into a shopping mall. The tracks, of course, have long been torn up, and where the tracks were, they were going to put a parking lot for the shopping mall. And so as they clear the brush and kind of landscape and level the former area where the tracks were, they find Bormann's skull. And of course, 1972, you don't have DNA evidence yet, but certainly dental evidence matched the kind of structure of the teeth with those of Martin Bormann. Although, again, there were a lot of conspiracy theories back then that somebody substituted a different head or a different set of teeth for and so forth for Bormann, that Bormann, that this is all fake. Nonetheless, 1974, the German government officially now declares Bormann as dead. So that's how long it took, until 1974, and then recently in the 2000s, they finally did a DNA test. In fact, 1998, they do the DNA test. And it's pretty easy because Bormann apparently, despite the fact that he's a Nazi, he remained faithful to the Catholic Church. He had a whole bunch of kids. Some of his sons became Catholic missionaries in South America, which further kind of enhanced this theory that maybe the father was hiding out in South America. And so one of the sons, or someone related to Bormann's huge family, gave their DNA sample, and they made a comparison to the remains that they found, and it's confirmed. Bormann indeed was killed in May of 1945, and probably Hitler's billions kind of got lost in, if Bormann was indeed carrying that briefcase, just got lost in that explosion, and they're sitting as dormant accounts somewhere collecting interest, presumably, and nobody knows that that's Hitler's money. The command structure of the NSDAP, the Nazi Party. I already talked about the Gauleiters. You also have 18 Reichsleiters that are almost parallel to the Gauleiter, but a Gauleiter has kind of geographic territory. A Reichsleiter has policy territory. So a Reichsleiter is almost equivalent to a minister in a government. There are, as I say, 18 Reichsleiter. For example, Goebbels will be the Reichsleiter for propaganda. He will be the Reichsminister of Enlightenment. Dr. Hans Frank, for example, is the Reichsleiter for law. Alfred Rosenberg, remarkably, will be the Reichsleiter for foreign policy. And so forth and so forth. Also, heads of party divisions are automatically made Reichsleiters as well. So Heinrich Himmler, along with all the other titles he has, also has the title of Reichsleiter and Reichsfuhrer and so forth. They're known as the Golden Pheasants, precisely for these uniforms that they wear, these kind of gold brown colored uniforms with golden braid. So they're kind of the aristocracy of the Nazi state. So once again, it's kind of almost this feudal kind of power, with Reichsleiters being equivalent to, princes, and Gauleiters maybe equivalent to dukes and counts and so forth. There is this kind of almost medieval feudal structure, with each one of them owing their allegiance to their monarch, Adolf Hitler, their Fuhrer. Here's Rosenberg again, as a Reichsleiter. The other part of the government, the state, of course, operates in a way that all states have to. Whether you're a Nazi communist or a democratic capitalist, you have to have a post office, and you have to have a railway, and you have to have a ministry that administrates a post office and a railway and taxes and so forth. So parallel to the Reichsleiters, you have Reichsministers. And sometimes, as in the case of Goebbels, their appointments are compatible. Sometimes they're not, as in the case of Rosenberg. Right? Rosenberg, you might remember, is appointed Reichsleiter for foreign policy, but the minister for foreign policy in the 1930s is an old appointee from the first Hitler coalition government, a guy called von Neurath. And so the question here is, who's in charge? The minister, von Neurath, or the Reichsleiter, Rosenberg? And in fact, neither of the two are in charge. There's a third guy coming up, Ribbentrop. Joachim Ribbentrop is kind of Hitler's favorite, and he heads this special think tank on foreign policy, and he, in fact, is the most influential individual on German foreign policy, despite these titles. And of course, that again describes what, some political scientists identify Nazi Germany as a kind of a chaotic polycracy. At the center of the government, of course, is the Reichschancellery. So here we have another chancellery. Remember, you had the Hitler chancellery, you had the party chancellery. Now you actually have the Reichschancellery, a third building where the chancellor is headquartered, in theory. It's a building that's very quickly built by the architect Albert Speer. It's huge. It's meant to be kind of intimidating. It's meant to be a kind of colossal, a show of the new party chancellor. If you go to visit Hitler here, you pass through these enormous doors with the Reichseagle above, two SS-men standing guard, ceremonial guards. And then you proceed to walk down these kind of Roman Forum hallways from room to room to room on your way to Hitler's office, which is way at the end of these hallways. So you go through one door, then another door, and another door, past all these guards, until you arrive at Adolf Hitler's office. And there inside, you will be greeted by the Fuhrer. And as I say, often visitors to the office are brought there to intimidate them. Unfriendly figures, and very formal meetings take place in this office. As I say, Hitler doesn't spend a lot of time there. He comes there for ceremonial occasions when he needs to be, the chancellor, but otherwise he likes just living in his chalet in Berchtesgaden and ruling from there. So that's essentially kind of the governmental structure. There'll be 16 Reichsministers, foreign minister, interior minister, aviation minister, as I say, public enlightenment, Goebbels, finance, justice, economics, agriculture, labor minister, education minister, and so forth. Science minister, a minister of church affairs, minister of transport, minister of postal service, minister of armaments. Eventually, there'll be a minister of Eastern territories. That'll be Rosenberg, will be appointed to that, although he will have no power. Himmler will be overruling him in the Eastern territories, and of course, minister of defense. And again, as I say, all these offices, they overlap and they conflict sometimes with each other. Very chaotic. The term, you know, we already see that Nazi Germany is not the kind of monolithic hierarchy that we often imagine it, people following orders. It's not quite like that. Polycracy, polycratic authoritarianism is another term, chaotic authoritarianism, chaotic polycracy. But polycracy is essentially a term coined by a German historian, Martin Brojat. Polycracy is often the most common used term. And again, I described to you how Hitler likes his minions to fight their way up the hierarchy, as I quoted from that letter, where somebody asked to be reappointed to an office because everybody follows him, and Hitler's response is, well, if everybody follows you, I don't need you to appoint. You don't need me to appoint you to that office. Just go take the office if everybody follows you. And so you have all these guys who are spending more time fighting each other, trying to win Hitler's favor. And that is going to be a key concept as well behind how the final solution in the Holocaust unfolds. There's a kind of two-school approach to the Holocaust, the functionalists versus the intentionalists. The intentionalists will argue that Hitler had always intended to murder the Jews. The functionalists will argue that the Nazis didn't have that intention at the beginning, that it was as a result of this kind of chaotic polycracy that eventually those that chose to kill the Jews won Hitler's favor, and others began to follow. And so when we look at the Holocaust in more detail, we're going to see that the Holocaust occurred in different territories under different German administrators at different times and in different ways, suggesting that there was no master plan, that when the Nazis, for example, started forming ghettos, they at that point did not know they were going to murder the Jews yet. It wasn't something that they had chosen as their policy. And so the functionalist argument is that essentially the Holocaust is a function of the polycratic totalitarian or the polycratic authoritarian system. But again, when we look at the Holocaust, we'll look at this in better detail. When we think of the Third Reich, we think of the Third Reich as a racial state, as an authoritarian state, certainly. Some people describe it as fascist, and the Nazis, of course, would reject that notion that they're fascists. They would say the Spanish are fascist, the Italians are fascist, we're National Socialists. And partly, I think National Socialism, of course, has that, what the Nazis will refer to scientific racialism incorporated in its ideology, something that certainly Mussolini was not both feet in, although eventually Italy will adopt race laws as well, partly as kind of a nod towards Nazi Germany, but Italians will be quite lax in enforcing them. But we also, of course, can characterize Nazi Germany as a police state. And the two primary players in making it so, of course, are Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler. Hermann Goering, of course, as the Minister of Interior, head of the Gestapo, the Minister of Interior for Prussia, head of Gestapo, and Himmler, of course, is chief. His first early governmental post is chief of the Munich police, and because of the Bavarian constitution, the chief of the Munich police also automatically becomes chief of police in all of Bavaria. So he becomes chief of the Bavarian provincial police. And so you can see the light green is Prussia, which Goering controls. The dark green is Bavaria, which Himmler controls. Now, under the Enabling Act, the federal government in Berlin also had the right to take over provincial, under the Reichstag decree. I take that back, not the Enabling Act, the Reichstag decree. Under the Reichstag decree, the federal government in Berlin has the right to take over a state's administration and the state's police. And so very quickly, they're taken over and put under Himmler. And so by 1934, essentially all policing in Germany is controlled by Himmler and Goering. And then, of course, Goering becomes more involved in rebuilding the Luftwaffe, the Air Force. Goering also becomes the plenipotentiary for the 4-year plan. Goering and Helmut Schacht are, rivals as to the militarization and the rebuilding of the German economy. And so Goering will essentially focus on those two offices and will pretty much give up running the policing and the Gestapo and all the. I'm not sure how long he remained Minister of Interior of Prussia. That's something you may want to look up. But eventually it becomes a minor thing. And so Himmler takes over all the police in all of Germany. And so by 35, all police in Germany are run by Himmler. The Reichstag fire, of course, already set up the concentration camps as a result of the Reichstag fire, the wild camps that were run by the SA. But as the SA begins to frighten members of the Nazi Party themselves, plus for all the brutality of the SA camps, as well as violation of various principles of law that even Hitler respected. For example, you're looking at a lawyer, who filed a complaint, a Jewish lawyer who filed a complaint with the local police for a client who had a store and his windows were broken up. And so he goes to the local police to file this complaint and instead finds in the police station all these Hilfspolizei who cut his pants off at the knee, as you can see, and they hang this sign on him, I am a Jew and I'll never complain against the Nazis, and they march him around the town. When Hitler sees this photograph, he gets very angry, and he issues a directive that lawyers are not to be harassed or molested by the Nazi Party or by the Hilfspolizei, even if they're representing Jewish clients. That law and order is more important than any kind of anti-Semitic sentiment. And again, this is going to be a long-standing policy of Hitler. This need, what he describes for scientific anti-Semitism. He doesn't want it to be sloppy and brutal and violent in the public sphere. He wants it to be, brutal and violent in a very disciplined, scientific, secret way. Hitler's worried that Germans will be sympathetic if they see Jews being harassed in the street. And we'll see that Hitler does understand his German, his fellow Germans, or, to the point that Germans certainly, well, maybe not necessarily sympathetic to the plight of Jews. When they see violence, they don't like to see disorder in the streets. And again, you get a sense of that from the Bissell article. And so every time there's kind of incidences like this, support for Nazi anti-Semitic policies actually declines among Germans. The guy who should be taking over the concentration camps, of course, is Wilhelm Frick, the Minister of Interior. He nominally is in charge of the police. He's in charge of the prison system. He's in charge of the camps. And so as the SA start being stripped of their police powers, and as fellow Nazis become afraid that they're going to end up in some concentration camp that nobody knows where it is, and so the SA are going to be removed from the concentration camp, Frick tries to take over the camps. In fact, Frick attempts to put a number of SA men on charges of murder committed inside the concentration camps. And immediately, Frick will run into opposition from Himmler, who wants to take over the camps. And Hitler, of course, eventually nods towards Himmler's organization. And Himmler now proceeds to seize control of the growing concentration camp system inside of Nazi Germany. The first thing that the SS does is they start anew. They empty all the camps. They release all the prisoners. Thank you for visiting with us. Hope you enjoy your stay. Come back soon, whatever. And all these inmates now go out the gate. They're released. Many of them are immediately rearrested and put back in the camp. But now the SS is going to take over the camps. Hitler also, after that failed verdict to indict members of the Communist Party for the Reichstag fire, Hitler now goes after the judges. Remember, one of the 25 points of the Nazi Party was the introduction of German common law, as opposed to what we call Roman law, Justinian principles of justice. One of them, for example, being nullum crimen sine lege. Nothing is a crime without it being specified in law. If the law does not describe an act as a crime, you cannot be charged for doing that act, nor can you be charged afterwards. If something's not illegal today, and I do it today, tomorrow, when it becomes illegal, I can't be charged for what I did today. Nullum crimen sine lege. The Nazis, the judges, as you can see from this image, all now swore their oath of loyalty to Hitler and the party. They wear, again, the Reichssiegel on their chest with the party sign, the swastika, and nullum crimen sine lege. Now the motto becomes nullum crimen sine poene. which means no crime unpunished. And so judges now are required under German common law that if something should be a crime, or if a perpetrator should have known that this, could be a crime, they're going to get punished for it, even if it's not on paper. And so that's the beginning of kind of this arbitrary court system where the objectives and the policies and the welfare of the Nazi Party and the German Volksgemeinschaft is paramount in a judge's decision, not what the letter of the law is. The Nazis would describe, anything that prevents a accused being convicted as a loophole, right? And so this just closes all loopholes. There's no such thing as a loophole in Nazi Germany. Himmler now, as I say, takes over the entire policing system of Germany as well as the SS. His full title will be Reichsführer SS und Chef der deutschen Polizei, the SS Reichsführer and chief of German police. That's often the acronym that you'll see under his signature, although often is just short form to RFSS, Reichsführer SS. He's going to make Time magazine 3 times. So to give a sense of Himmler is a good way of looking at just how chaotic this polycracy is. As Reichsführer of the SS, Hitler, of course, reports directly to Hitler, as the SS are Hitler's Praetorian Guard and have all sworn an oath of loyalty to Hitler. Between an SS-man and Hitler, there is no higher authority than the Reichsführer Himmler. However, he's also the chief of police for Germany. And as such, nominally, Himmler reports to Frick, the Minister of Interior, who then reports to Hitler as Chancellor. So, Himmler is reporting to Hitler as Fuhrer. Frick is reporting to Hitler as Chancellor, as a minister, and it gets even more complicated. Himmler, of course, is a Reichsleiter as well, and of course, as Reichsleiter, he reports nominally to Martin Bormann between a Reichsleiter and Hitler. On top of that, for example, Himmler is the head of a Hauptamt, HA, the head office. It's known as the RUSHA, the SS Race and Resettlement head office. The head of that head office reports to the Reichsführer, and he's Walter Darre. Walter Darre, however, while the head of this department within the SS, reporting to Himmler, obviously, is also the Minister of Agriculture, reporting to Hitler as Chancellor. And eventually, of course, Himmler is going to take over in 1943 the office of the Ministry of Interior. So Himmler himself will become a minister in 43. And by 45, he's also commanding a army. He'll become a military commander, where he essentially mismanages the 6th SS Army. So, in this confusion and interlocking chains of command, when someone makes a decision, Who knows who made it, in what chain of command, what way did the orders travel, or whether there were even any orders. It's completely incomprehensible in that chaotic state. So, that's gives a lot of ground, certainly for um, those who argue the functionalist theory of the final solution. That gives them a lot of ground in terms of, first of all, we have never so far located any written order ordering the systematic murder of the European Jews in what we know as the final solution. Lots of orders about pacifying the population, lots of orders about putting Jews into ghettos, no order giving the order to begin the final solution. And so, in the absence of that written order, and apparently it never existed, everybody who testified about getting any kind of order, it was always verbal and always coming down from from the top. So we've never been able to trace even when that decision was made. Historians argue that it occurred somewhere between August of 1941 and October of 1941, somewhere in that date. Himmler, I could tell you a little bit about Himmler here. Himmler, here he is, little baby Himmler, pretty much looking like the adult Himmler. Himmler's father is an academic, a philologist, very strict, very dominant of Himmler. Himmler is standing in the background behind him. He has a brother, I think about 2 years or 3 years older than him. The father closely supervises Himmler. For example, he instructs that Himmler has to keep a diary, that he must make daily entries in his diary, and the father makes the first 3 or 4 entries for Himmler into his own diary, just to show him how he's going to do it. And then every week, Himmler has to bring his diary to his father so his father can edit Himmler's private diary. So you can imagine how neurotic you're going to come out with that kind of dominance. Himmler wants to join the military, but remember, Himmler, being born 1900, is 14 years old when the war breaks out, and he's 18 when the war ends. So he manages to get into officers' school, but the war ends before he can be deployed on the field. And so Himmler is forever kind of ashamed that he never saw combat. He's got no military medals, unlike many other of his fellow officers. Again, if you read Bissel's article, you know how many in Germany were kind of, especially among politicians and so forth of that generation, were bonded in their wartime experience. So Himmler doesn't experience any of that, and for the rest of his life, Himmler will constantly try to kind of prove his macho prowess and his athletic abilities, his abilities as as a with a handgun and rifle and so forth. And SS men kind of snicker behind his back. So here's Himmler kind of in the uniform of an officer cadet, but he never, unlike his brother, he never sees any combat. After the Second World War, Himmler sorry, I keep saying Hitler. Himmler is a member of this kind of monarchist restoration movement. As I say, I kind of described it as back to the earth, almost like hippies, a kind of vegan, Nazi, anti-Semitic vegan movement, if you can imagine something like that. He is, as I say, a early member of the elite part of the SA, the bodyguards. He is Gregor Strasser's ally. He's part of the Gregor Strasser group until he's lured away by Himmler. He marries a woman about a decade older than him. Um, she's a homeopathic nurse, and together they kind of become interested in homeopathy and natural medicine. And of course, Himmler, among his occult activities, will also nurture all these herb gardens for homeopathic medicines. So fascinated by that. They have a number of children. I think his daughter, if I'm not mistaken, is still surviving, is still alive. And so very early, around the age of 27, here you can see with Gregor Himmler's with Gregor Strasser there in the background. Himmler will be appointed, as I say, as Reichsfuhrer of the SS. 27 years old, very, very young, even by today's standards, to be running an organization like that. Himmler is often described as a chicken farmer, a Himmler, or a manure salesman. Himmler is a graduate in agricultural management from a polytechnical school, kind of the way Ryerson was until it became a university. He did not sell manure. He was a salesman of chemical fertilizer, something slightly different. If you're going to try to kind of denigrate a historical figure, calling him a manure salesman, at least get it right. And of course, Germany was one of the countries that had the most advanced chemical fertilizer industry. They were kind of, in general, German chemical industries were in advance of many others. He also owned enormous chicken farms as well, he and his wife. I don't think Himmler was there collecting eggs or wringing chickens' necks, like a chicken farmer might. He managed a large chicken farm that he invested in. But to describe him as a chicken farmer is no more accurate than to describe Hitler, as he's often described, as a paper hanger or a wall painter. Right? And now, of course, once Rome is done away with, Himmler now starts shaping the SS as this elite Teutonic Knight Praetorian Guard, the so-called asphalt soldiers. At first, you had to be over 6 feet tall, blue eyes, blonde, to be a member of the kind of bodyguards. There is a unit that eventually will become a division, the Leibstandarte, the Life Guards of Adolf Hitler, first SS division, as it will eventually be known. These are not, they began as Hitler's bodyguards, but eventually just become a ceremonial guard. They're the guys who are, at the chancellery. As I say, the black uniform is a kind of a parade uniform. The choice of black, of course, comes from Himmler's admiration of the Jesuit order of in Catholicism, and in general the priesthood. Black, of course, is worn by priests often as a symbol of purity, and white or black can symbolize purity in various cultures, sometimes both, uh, and so the black uniform is supposed to symbolize purity of race. You, of course, cannot become an assessment unless you can prove if that you have no German ancestors going back to your great grandparents. And because of kind of the way Prussia and Germany births were carefully registered, that's not a very difficult task. All those family records existed. It's going to be essential eventually for people, the matter of life and death, whether they can prove that they have no um, Jewish relatives back in 1750. Eventually that's how far it will go back. For example, for an SS officer to marry, he will have to prove that he and his bride have no Jews in their past going back to 1750. And so genealogists will become very powerful in Nazi Germany, and it will be a booming business for genealogy, because whether you marry, whether you're admitted into the SS, or whether you get a high ranking government post, all depends on you proving your racial quote purity, and eventually your life could depend on it. Eventually, once Germany goes to war, the black uniform will be just for ceremonial purposes, and eventually most of the SS will prefer the gray uniform, the same color that German soldiers wore, and by the middle of the war, black uniforms are kind of considered almost kind of embarrassing, because it's the guys that haven't gone to war that wear the black uniform. But in the 1930s, of course, it is the symbol of this elite corps. Here you can see the militarized Waffen SS marching, and they're wearing the dove gray uniform, or the field gray uniform that essentially is associated with soldiers that go to fight. You can notice the officer on the left. There's an example of an old fighter's chevron. On his right arm. That signifies that he joined the Nazi Party prior to January 30th, 1933, and he would have a title within the Nazi party as an old fighter. So kind of the elite within the Nazi, old fighters. And presumably he would wear a gold party badge too, if he was at least among the first 100,000 that joined. This actually maybe is a good moment to kind of look at when you're looking at these photographs, who's who. I mean, here is an SS officer. You can see with the twin lightnings, the Siegruns on the collar. His rank is indicated on the other collar. In this case, he's a lieutenant colonel, 4 pips and the stripe. This is a German army officer. And right away you can see the difference between the skull on the cap and the military cluster of oak leaves and the Reichscolor rondelle there. The eagle, the Reichs eagle, is worn on the right breast. SS officers don't wear it. SS men don't wear it on over their breast. They wear it on their sleeve, on the right sleeve. So, these are both combatants, but they belong to completely two different organizations. And of course, at the end of the war, all members of the SS will be considered criminal until they're decriminalized or denazified, while the army is not. The army is considered just like the US Army or the British Army, depending on their individual behavior. Um, so when you look at photographs, um, they kind of look the same, these German troops and these ones, but clearly these are different forces performing different duties. These are again German army combat units. Again, eagle on the breast. These are SS SD police units. And although from a distance they look the same, they're doing different things, different functions. They're performing a criminal function. Not that the army did not perpetrate crimes either. In fact, we have thousands of photographs of German army troops committing murders and shootings and so forth. As in this picture, for example, where you have a German army sergeant. Again, clearly he's a military official posing in front of these civilians that he had just participated in the murder of. And there's a huge exhibition in the 1990s in Germany that people were throwing Molotov cocktails at, of German army atrocity photographs, because the German members of the German army used to like to say, well, I was in the German army, I was a good soldier like G.I. Joe. It's those filthy SS that committed all those battlefield atrocities. The army was pure. Well, thousands of these atrocity pictures go on exhibition in Germany, showing that the German army certainly has a lot of, blood on their hands beyond just whatever they had to do in combat, and were perpetrators to a great extent as well, and participated in many of these battlefield atrocities. And this only really entered dialogue, public discourse in Germany in the late 1990s. That's how long it took. Until then, the German army was considered to be, untouchable. Himmler introduces all sorts of rituals into the SS. For example, marriage vows. When you joined the SS, were urged to, where you fill out whether you're Protestant or Catholic, you were urged to write in believer, kind of a vague, I believe in a higher power, but it's not necessarily Jesus. It's not necessarily the Judaic God, as we know from the Old Testament and so forth. Nazis, of course, are discouraging the Old Testament and getting ready to work on the New Testament as well. I talked about that before. Again, in order for an SS officer to marry, he had to prove that his bride was racially pure, going back to 1750. If it was an SS non-commissioned officer or private, they had to show the racial purity of their bride going back to 1800. There's this kind of pagan altar. Let's get a closer look at the altar. Of course, there's a picture of Hitler there, all this pagan greenery around it. Deutschland erwache, Germany Awake is the slogan. Baptismals as well. Their children are no longer being baptized in the Christian rite. They're being baptized as children of Adolf Hitler and so forth, in the name of Adolf Hitler. So he's essentially, as I say, creating this kind of new culture, that the SS begin to represent, as I say, the elite of that culture. There's Christmas. Right? Christmas is now moved to December 22nd, Yuletide. Of course, it's the shortest day of or sorry, the indeed the shortest day of the year, kind of opposite of the solstice day. Now it becomes paganized. Say Yuletide is a pagan festival. Kind of reasons going back 2,000 years to the Roman Empire why, December 25th was chosen as the day for Christmas Day. Part of the reason is because of essentially it was always a pagan holiday of rebirth. As days start getting longer after December 22nd, that's kind of the reason why December 25th was chosen as the date. But here you can see the kind of Yuletiders they have on their tables. Again, with all these kind of cryptic, runic symbols carved into them. Handing out of the honor swords as well. Each SS-man carried a dagger, a Holbein-style dagger, and it was inscribed with the motto of the SS. Meine Ehre heißt Treuen. My loyalty is my honor, or my honor is my loyalty. Kind of an interchangeable, loose translation. It's hard to translate it exactly into English, but basically loyalty is one SS-man's honor. It's also inscribed on their belt buckles as well. My loyalty is my honor. The German army on their belt buckle wear an inscription reading Gott mit uns, God is with us. Everybody feels God is with us, including the Nazis, whatever God they ended up believing in.